The siren of a police cruiser pierced the darkness of the docks. Flashlight beams swept over an old man, bent beneath a wooden piling, fitting something beneath it. 77 years old, alone, without a permit, and fined on the spot. No one came to his defense. No one asked why. But 3 days later, the U.S. Navy appeared. No warning, no fanfare, no banners. Just uniformed engineers erecting something the likes of which Gulfport had never seen. And his name etched on a brass plaque. Who was he? Why did an act deemed illegal compel an entire force to stand up? And what made that small light ignite a nation? Don't look away. This story isn't just about electricity. It's about memory, about honor, and about a man America had forgotten until he made them remember. All right, my dear viewers, prepare for a tale that will leave you in awe. Take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you truly connect with what I'm sharing here. And drop a comment below to tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. It's always thrilling to see people joining us from every corner of the globe. Nobody has lived on this shoreline's edge as long as he has. A place where wind and sand wear away memories, and sunlight always glints off the metal roofs of mobile homes. Yet for over 30 years, David Walsh has chosen to stay in a small, silver-painted tin box less than a mile from the water's edge. Strangers might think him poor, but they're wrong. He lacks nothing, only sees no need for more. A place to rest, a small solar panel perched on the roof, gathering just enough power each day, an old wooden table strewn with copper wire, tweezers, and half-soldered circuit boards. For him, that's enough. David doesn't say much, but everyone around here knows him as the Solar Panel Old Man. The nickname stuck after he quietly repaired broken lights for young fishermen. They struggled to head out at night with flickering lanterns and no money for replacements. David fixed them for free, never charging, never complaining. They showed their gratitude, leaving behind a can of beer, a bag of fish hung on his door. He never refused, but never asked. He lived like that, gently, silently, almost invisibly. No one knew that this frail old man had once held a position no one dared to dream of, the chief power engineer aboard the USS Buckner in 1973. Back then, he was young, cold-eyed. His hands danced across the ship's massive electrical system as if playing a familiar melody. And on a day no one mentions, because he never did, amid mountain-high waves off the coast of Iran, the USS Buckner lost all power. A nightmare at sea. No radar, no communications, no signal. 61 souls adrift on a storm-tossed ocean. David was on the night watch. The alarm blared in the dark like a call from hell. He sprinted down the narrow corridor, his heart pounding like war drums, eyes straining at the dying flicker of the control panel. He knew, if he didn't restore power within minutes, the ship would be declared lost. No one would know their position. No one could save them. And then, without panic, without profanity, he bowed his head, hands trembling, dismantling circuit by circuit in the wavering glow. They say he had 8 minutes, only 8, to perform the impossible. In those 8 minutes, he became one with the system, reconnected emergency power lines, rerouted switches, used his bare hands as heat sinks, and with every ounce of his skill, brought the ship back to life. A small ping appeared, like the first heartbeat after a coma. The ship's signals resumed. They were located, and within hours, all 61 were rescued. No one died. No one was seriously injured. They clung to each other and wept. Some called him a hero. But he silently wiped his brow, said nothing. Not once in the 30 years that followed, living among civilians, did he speak of it again. No medals were hung, no interviews conducted, no news stories told. To him, it was simply what needed to be done. He never sought praise, saw no need for thanks, never expected anyone to ask. Now, in that little corner at the beach's end, where sand drifts through the doorway each evening, he still sits by the old table, soldering a burned-out chip, taping up the casing of a discarded lamp. Occasionally, a young fisherman stops by, says thanks, then leaves, and he bows his head, smiles quietly, as if all his life he had only one job: to help others survive in silence. Monday morning, the sea breeze whispered through the dune grasses, carrying its familiar salt tang. David Walsh stood alone before his small trailer, diligently wiping layers of dust from the solar panel. It was his daily ritual, unhurried, meticulous, as though he were preparing for something grand. Today, he planned to install an additional floodlight for the East Dock, where newly licensed fishing boats still struggled to find a safe berth at night. He had nearly finished soldering the circuit board. Only a few connections remained. The crunch of gravel under wheels made him look up. A Coast Guard patrol vehicle crept forward, silent, stiff, no siren, no announcement, no greeting. The door opened. 2 men stepped out in bright safety vests, spotless white gloves, dark sunglasses hiding most of their faces. They said nothing. They simply approached, presented a citation, and in a clipped tone informed him that he was violating unregistered lighting regulations. The lights he installed could interfere with harbor navigation. David paused. He said nothing at first. In that moment, he sensed something alien descending, cold and harsh. Unhurried, he retrieved the carefully kept wiring diagram from his shirt pocket and calmly explained that his entire system ran on solar power, was completely off-grid, entirely incapable of causing the interference they feared. But before he could finish, one officer turned away, produced a measuring device, and swept the area around the light fixture. They photographed, took notes, signed the citation, asking no further questions. Finally, they placed the $400 fine on the old wooden table in his yard, where he normally sat soldering burnt-out boards and repairing lights for the young fishermen, never charging a penny. The crisp white paper lay there, a cold slap to the face of the man who had spent the week working for free, simply wishing to bring a bit of light to the dock tonight. David did not argue. He did not lash out. He quietly removed his oil-stained gloves, set them aside, then sat on the front step of his trailer and exhaled deeply. Soft sunlight dappled the faded metal roof. The sea breeze continued to blow, but inside him, something had shattered. Not over the fine itself, but at being treated like a wrongdoer. Here, in the place where for so many years he had devoted himself in silent service. He had never done it for praise, never claimed to be a hero. But this morning, he was treated as if the very light he provided was a threat, not a help. The 2 men left without a backward glance. No thank you, no hesitation. David sat there long after they departed, his gaze fixed on the distant dock. He did not feel anger, only a slow, smoldering sense of loss. A fatigue not of the body, but born of misunderstanding, from the cold cruelty of rules that felt devoid of compassion. And so he sat amid the vast sky and sea, beside a citation and an unfinished lamp, Yet his back did not stoop. His eyes remained steady, for he knew that some things, unrecognized though they may be, are still worth carrying on, like a light shining out so that others can find their way home. Ray Moreno, a young fisherman barely a year into the trade, stood nearby and witnessed it all. He said nothing. He intervened not. Yet his gaze remained fixed on the small man sitting silently on the step, the citation paper before him, as though that single moment had punched a hole through the calm sea within Ray. He remembered all too well. On his very first night at sea, his inverter system had suddenly died just as darkness fell. No one could help, except David. He had appeared like a familiar figure, rummaged through his toolbox, quietly adjusted every connection, then walked away, accepting nothing more than Ray's trembling handshake. That morning, Ray uttered no word. He simply slipped out his phone, hit record, and captured the entire scene. Not to go viral, but out of an instinct to memorialize an injustice. In the frame, the silver-haired man sat motionless in the sunlight, the electrical violation notice peeking out beside the table, and beyond, the patrol vehicle disappearing into the distance. There was no shouting, no anger, only a silent sorrow, heavy as the early morning mist on the coastal cliffs. That evening, Ray posted the 32-second clip to TikTok. But the caption, "He lit our docks, they find him," #light the Gulf, was a dam of emotion breaking free. In less than 24 hours, the video surpassed 2 million views. Comments rolled in like tidal waves from across America. That's not a violation. That's a contribution. The real crime is forgetting our veterans. The hashtag #LightTheGulf spread like wildfire. It was no longer just a lone video. It became a symbol of something deep and unspoken that everyone felt, overdue recognition. The way someone like David had lived so quietly, only to be punished for his good deed, made people ask themselves, how many more Davids have we forgotten? A local paper began digging into David's history and uncovered what nobody in the region had ever heard him mention. In 1973, the Navy had awarded him a citation for designing an emergency power generator aboard the USS Buckner, saving the entire crew amid the stormy waters off Iran. A technical miracle, yet never recorded in any book. That news flared like a spark in the dead of winter. Major outlets joined in: CNN, NPR, The Washington Post. Headlines ran in unison: "Veteran lights the harbor." "Old man fined for installing lights. Once saved 61 sailors." No embellishment was needed. David's life was drama enough to move the world. Then, on the 4th day after the incident, the unexpected happened. Out front of David's tiny trailer, the place no one visited except a few familiar fishermen, a convoy rolled up. Not police vehicles, but representatives of the U.S. Navy. They stepped out, this time without white gloves, without dark glasses, without cold formality. They carried a sealed letter, stamped Department of Defense. Inside was an apology and an official acknowledgement of his 1973 heroism, publicly entered into the national military record. No fanfare, no cameras. But for the first time in over 40 years, the old man straightened his spine, received the wooden box containing the symbol of honorable service, his hand trembling slightly, yet his eyes steady. Not because he'd waited for it, but because now he knew. The light he kindled would no longer shine in silence. Dear viewers, take a moment to relax, or sip a glass of water, and stay tuned for the twists yet to come. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. It's always wonderful to see people joining us from every corner of the globe. Comment 1 if you enjoyed this story so we can keep bringing you more. Thursday morning at the Biloxi fish docks was quieter than usual. No engines roared from the little boats. No hurried voices hauling baskets of fish. The sea breeze blew colder than ever, carrying a dense layer of mist that settled over the unnaturally still water. No one spoke, but everyone sensed something was coming. Something unlike a normal day. At exactly 8 o'clock, 3 trucks bearing the U.S. Navy emblem slipped into the harbor area. No sirens, no loudspeakers, no announcement. On their cargo boxes, only the letters USN were stenciled in white against gray. All eyes turned toward them, though no one uttered a word. When they stopped, the doors swung open, and a team of engineers disembarked. Clad in navy blue uniforms, unarmed, unadorned by medals, they made no show of ceremony, simply walked with purpose, as though they already knew why they'd come. They did not come to deliver speeches, nor to explain. They quietly opened the truck beds, unloaded coils of electrical cable, metal poles, drilling equipment, and solar panels carefully wrapped in thick cloth. They began setting up warning signs, stringing off the work area, then measured and marked anchor points. And without signal or countdown, a handheld drill bit into the earth, its whir breaking the stillness like a silent exclamation mark, heralding something Biloxi had never seen. Local residents began to gather, unbidden, unblocked. They lined up behind the barricades, hands on hips, eyes wide, watching the engineers erect the strange new structure in the familiar harbor. And among all those watching, one man remained seated as he did every morning: David Walsh. He said nothing. He made no gesture. He did not step forward. He simply sat on the weathered wooden step of his trailer, quietly observing from afar. A steaming cup of black coffee rested in his hand. Behind his bifocals, his eyes followed each movement, each drill stroke, each carefully replicated action. He needed no one to tell him what was happening. He already understood. From the moment the first truck appeared, he knew. He had been chief engineer aboard a Navy ship. He had read and drawn hundreds of schematics. By the materials, by the way the engineers worked together, he knew what they were building. And for the first time in many years, he saw once more the systems he had devoted his life to, returning quietly, yet completely. That afternoon, the Navy's Logistics Command issued an official notice. No press conference, no oration, just a brief electronic bulletin, its language enough to hush the Biloxi community for a moment. The announcement read, "In recognition of Mr. David Walsh's lifelong contribution to sustainable systems and silent service, a renewable microgrid station will be established in Biloxi Port, named in his honor." Just that. No flowery words, no lengthy praise. But that was what moved everyone, because, for the first time, the U.S. Navy was building a mini solar power station not for military use, not for combat or maritime defense, but solely for the civilian community of Biloxi, the people who lived, worked, and labored here every day. And that power station would bear his name. A name never seeking thanks, never splashed across headlines, never spoken of his heroic past. A man who chose to repair lamps in silence, to live simply, to remain quiet, even when fined for a kind deed. And now, at the docks that had welcomed countless returning vessels, that name would endure, etched on a brass plaque under the sun's rays, in every volt of electricity carried from the Navy's first clean energy station dedicated to civilians. no applause, no ribbon cutting. But that silence was the loudest tribute life could offer him. No one needed to tell them. No official announcement was made. Yet, in the days after that Thursday morning, more and more people began to come to David's little home. At first, only a few familiar faces from the docks, to shake his hand, to sit with him in silence for a few moments. Then someone brought a bundle of dried pine wood. Another carried a coil of copper wire wrapped carefully in cloth. No one said exactly what they planned to do. All that mattered was they left behind the materials David had used to solder, assemble, and bring light to that stretch of night-bound sea. One day, a group of young engineers from Jackson knocked on his door. They looked barely out of school. Sweat barely darkened their shirts. They held technical manuals in hand. One of them spoke, earnestly. They hadn't come for an autograph or photo. They just wanted to learn how he had designed that solar power system, how he'd done it back when he was a ship's engineer. They had read the articles, watched the videos, but they wanted to see with their own eyes, to understand why an emergency system he'd designed decades ago was still held up today as proof of unconditional dedication. David said little. He studied them for a moment, then stepped inside. A while later, he returned with an old leather-bound notebook. The pages inside were yellowed, corners folded by time. He turned each page slowly until he stopped at a pencil-drawn schematic. He laid it on the table, pointed to the straight lines, the tiny arrows, the neatly written numbers. "This is how I routed the current along the hull," he said, eyes never leaving the page. "No software, no network. Only paper, pen, and the lives of others on the other end." His words were few, yet everyone fell silent. The news spread quickly. Though no one trumpeted it, something in that quiet made people believe in the true worth of the act. Not long after, the Biloxi City Council officially announced the withdrawal of the earlier citation. There was no grand press conference, only a clear statement on their website reading, "Due to the special nature and genuine contribution, the citation issued to Mr. David Walsh for unpermitted lighting at Biloxi Port is hereby rescinded." Less than a day later, representatives of the Coast Guard came to see him. This time they wore no bright uniforms, no dark sunglasses, brought no meters or citation forms. Just two men on his porch, heads bowed, offering an apology, short but sincere. "We were wrong not to listen," one said. David nodded. No resentment. No further words needed. At the very spot once marked "Electrical Code Violation" now stood the Walsh Microgrid Renewable Energy Station, the first solar power system to bear a citizen's name rather than a general's. This system supplies over 70% of the nightly lighting needs for the entire dock and provides stable power to 4 local businesses around the harbor. A small installation, but one capable of turning one man's light into a community beacon. There was no grand opening ceremony, no orchestra, no banners flying high. Just a small brass plaque mounted on the main solar array's post, gleaming in the morning sun. It bore no large letters, no biography, no title, only a single line, simple yet potent enough to choke anyone who paused to read it. He lit the docks before anyone asked. He had lit the docks before anyone even asked him to. And perhaps, for a man who chose silence all his life like David did, that humble, respectful inscription was the truest honor he had ever received. David still lives in that little house, its metal roof faded, the wooden door long unpainted, and an old table pressed against the porch where he habitually sits. assembling circuits, soldering tiny components by hand. Each morning, he keeps his old routine, waking before full daylight, brewing a cup of black coffee, then walking down to the docks with deliberate, somewhat heavy steps at the knees. There, he wipes the solar panel like a mirror, meticulous, patient, cleansing off the night's dew and the sea's salty grit. Then he bends to check the switchgear, twists a few small knobs, reseats each connector. It is his daily work, as if light itself cannot arrive without his hands to set it free. But one thing has changed. He is no longer working alone. Children from the nearby elementary school now gather by the dozen each week. Groups of 3, groups of 5, sometimes 10, name tags dangling from their shirts, backpacks slung over their shoulders, trailers here to learn hands-on about renewable energy. Each child's eyes go wide at the sight of the panel, the capacitor bank he built himself, the tiny switch capable of lighting the entire dock. They sit cross-legged on the wooden planks, listening to him speak of electric current as though it were a fairy tale. Though they may not grasp every word, their rapt gazes reveal they are utterly captivated. And the young fishermen, those he once helped repair lights, now return to ask, "Uncle David, how can we convert our boats to solar power?" They seek nothing fancy, simply enough light to avoid being lost at sea, and they trust he knows the way, because for all these years he has been the one who keeps their harbor from darkness. People have begun to name him in their stories, not by his past deeds, not by his rank as a naval engineer, not by the fact that he once saved an entire crew off Iran's coast. None of that matters to them as the reason for their respect. They simply call him by a name as unadorned as it is profound: the Keeper of Light. That name spread on the sea breeze, gentle, true. That evening, the harbor was washed in a soft green glow from the solar lamps. Every fixture ran smoothly, no flickers, no overloaded capacitors. David made one last inspection before heading home. He walked slowly along the seawall, observing each moored vessel, each beam of light dancing on the dark water. By the time he returned to his trailer, it was late. He sank into the old wooden chair, where for years he'd sat alone with only the wind for company. But tonight, the breeze from the Gulf carried a familiar scent: salted fish and engine oil, the scent of the sea, the scent of a lifetime that cannot be washed away. He said nothing. He simply lifted his gaze toward the small plaque at the station's entrance, bearing his name in bronze, shining under the pale green light. The inscription beneath remained there, unpretentious yet profound. He lit the docks before anyone asked. He did not smile. He did not weep. He simply placed a hand on his left chest, right over the spot where his heart has beaten steadily each morning. A simple gesture, like the salute he once gave in uniform, like soldiers saluting the flag, like offering silent respect without words. No one witnessed that gesture. No one filmed it. Yet there, in that gentle yet warm glow, amid the salty air and the distant lap of waves, he seemed to offer a quiet thank you. Not to anyone, but to the very light he has tended all his life. For he understood deeply, some things are not done for gratitude, not for praise, not so one's name can be etched on a plaque. They are done because at the core you know that light is not meant to be kept for yourself. Thank you for joining us. Don't forget to let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. It's always wonderful to see people joining us from every corner of the globe. Comment 1 if you enjoyed this story so we can keep bringing you more.